Hi there, welcome to Boy Meets Quilt. I'm Andrew Vay Hansen, and this is our second video for the Brooklyn Connected Quilt-Along. Hashtag Brooklyn Connected QAL. So, I hope you are ready to get started with the quilt-along. It's going to be super fun. This video is just going to be about fabric selection and kind of going over the basics of the quilt pattern. I showed a picture in the earlier video introducing the pattern, but here it is again. As you can see, it's just made up of blocks of 5 varying stripes, alternating between 2 different colors for each block. So as you can see with the graphic that I've thrown up on the screen, the original idea behind the design was to do a rainbow quilt. And on this graphic, you see I just put stripes of the rainbow colors in the order of the rainbow, which is certainly one way you can put together this quilt. You could also stick with the rainbow colors, but mix them all up however you choose. That's totally up to you. So that is definitely a beautiful option to go with if that's what you're thinking. If you see that quilt and you're like, that's the quilt I want to make, then go for it. But the beauty of this design is that you can basically do whatever you want with it. And that's the beauty of the quilt-along in general. Do whatever you want, post your progress, and inspire everyone else on what they're working on. I love that. So, I've picked out some fabrics for the quilt that I'm thinking of doing, and I'll show those later on. But first I just wanted to go through some requirements. The quilt-along pattern that Barbara's created is using some specific measurements, and those are going to give you some specific sized blocks. And so you're going to need a fabric to fill in those requirements. Now, that said, if you're a more advanced quilter or someone who's been doing this for a while, then you know that these patterns are just suggestions. You can really do whatever you want. So if you want to make blocks that are going to end up being around 8-inch squares, great, because that's what the pattern that we're working with is going to call for. But if you're looking at your fabric stash and you're like, you know what, I'm going to be making, I have a bunch of charm packs that I want to use, which are little 5.5-inch square pieces of fabric, and you just want to cut those up into tiny little alternating stripe blocks, go for it. That would look beautiful. You can also use the yardage that you have or want to go buy at a quilt shop, or you can use pre-cuts. So Barbara Danzy has been using layer cakes, which are 10-inch squares, packs of 10-inch squares. But you could also use jelly rolls, which are strips that are 2.5 inches wide, and then the width of fabric. You could use fat quarter packs, which is what I'm going to use, because that's basically what I buy when I go to a quilt shop. I just buy tons of fat quarter packs. So I've gone ahead and I went through my stash last night, and which is always fun for me to kind of remind myself of this beautiful fabric that I've been buying. And I think I've decided on the fabrics that I'm going to use. So I'm going to show those to you right now. And again, these are just suggestions. You could decide to make a 2-color quilt. 2-color quilts are always very popular. The traditional blue and white quilts or red and white quilts. Or you could do, you know, fuchsia and chartreuse quilts. Whatever you want to do. Just pick 2 colors and then alternate those stripes, and then you have your blocks and you can maneuver them, and you just have this really striking 2-color quilt. You could do a quilt where you do rainbow, but instead of kind of that gradual, almost ombre rainbow effect, you could do complementary colors in each block. So you could have a blue and orange block, and then a pink and green block, and then a yellow and purple block, and combine those, and so the alternating stripes are complementary colors. That could be really cool. So this is totally up to you, whatever you want. As I show you my fabrics, I'll go through my thinking about the color choice as well as the patterns, because I'm using a lot of prints in mine. My quilt's going to look very scrappy, which I'm always a fan of. But you can also do solids, or you can do a combination of solids and scrappy. It's totally up to you. The important thing is that you love it, that you're gonna love working with the fabric throughout the quilt-along, and that your eyes are just gonna enjoy whatever colors you decide on as you put it all together. And what's also important is that you post your progress. So be sure to use the hashtag, be sure to post on the Facebook page, on Instagram, follow the hashtag on Instagram, and that way you see what everyone else is making. That's the whole point of this quilt-along. It's called Brooklyn Connected for a reason. We want to connect with the community at large and bring us all together during these scary times when we're self-quarantining and social distancing. So let's look at the fabrics that I picked out. So here's the color palette that I'm using for one of the small quilts that I'm going to be making with this Brooklyn Connected pattern. I'm going off of Barbara Danzy's original idea with the rainbow palette, but I'm using my stash fat quarters, and some of these are even scraps that I've used from other projects. And so I'm using a lot of prints. I tried to find a palette where the colors are going to kind of blend together for part of the rainbow. And what I really tried to do was find a mix of high volume and low volume prints for each color. So what, for instance, going back to this orange, these are both prints. You can see here, but this is a very low volume print. From a distance, you might not even notice that it's a print. It would just look like a certain kind of orange, whereas this is a very high volume print with multiple colors and some very bold graphics. This one, they're both this is a little more high volume than I probably would normally have picked, but I thought these two worked really well together, so I was like, what the heck. And then for some of them, I have a nice, fairly high volume print here, and then super low volume. This is more of a blender than even a print. Technically it's a print because this is supposed to give the feeling of like a linen or a wool, but it's actually just quilting cotton, and so this pattern has been printed on it. But it's just really more of a blender color, but I really like that it has more texture than a pure solid would have. So I'm really looking forward to starting to cut into these fabrics. I'm very much looking forward to working with my stash. So that's my rainbow palette. Now I'm going to show you what I'm going to try and do with my neutrals. Okay, so this is the neutral palette that I think I'm going to work with. This was a little trickier for me. I don't have a whole lot of neutrals in my stash, but I thought this would be a fun way to challenge myself. So similar to the rainbow palette, I wanted to create a circle of fabrics that were going to blend into each other. And I don't know how successful I am doing this, but it's going to be fine. It's going to be fun. Again, similar to my rainbow palette, I picked a combination. When I was picking the two fabrics for each block, I wanted more of a print and more of a blender. We'll see. We'll see how this works out. I think it could be fun to try it out, see what it looks like. So the important part to keep in mind when you're thinking about fabric selection for this project is that each block is basically made up of two separate fabrics. If you wanted to work with solids, which is totally a viable option, you can do a couple different things. You can have, for instance, in these cases, you can have similar hues, but of different tints or shades of those hues. And then if you wanted, you could even do a fairly monochrome overall quilt and just use tints and shades of one particular hue, maybe your favorite color. My favorite color is green, so that's why I'm showing you these right now. Another option I mentioned earlier is you could do something completely contrasting. So you could take two hues that are more opposite each other on the color wheel. For instance, this kind of reddish and this navy blue.
which really pop out. And that could make a very graphic quality for the overall quilt. It wouldn't blend, but it would still be very striking. It would be really pleasing to the eye if you wanted to do something like that. And you could do that, like I said, you could make it just a two-color quilt for the whole thing, make all of your blocks out of the same two colors. Or you could do, say, red and green, red and blue. You could pick one contrasting color and then a bunch of different other colors. Or you could match them up. You could have red and blue here. You could pick a pink and a green. You could pick a yellow and a purple. All different kinds of shades and tints. And that could be really fun.
So I hope that has helped ease some of your concerns you might have around fabric selection. Hopefully I've given you a few ideas. Again, the world is your oyster. Pick whatever you want to work with for however many weeks it takes to put this quilt together. The nice part about this pattern is the quilt can be as large or as small as you want. The blocks can be as large or as small as you want. Obviously, the written pattern has specific dimensions, but you don't have to follow those. If you have different amounts of fabric, but fabric you really want to use, go for it. Do whatever you want. If you want to get really creative, you could even mix up the sizes of each block within the whole quilt itself. But that starts getting a little tricky. That's maybe for a more advanced quilter, someone who is used to doing a little more improv piecing and figuring those things out. It also would help if you have a design wall so that you can stick things up on the wall and see how they fit together. For the beginning quilters, just stick with the written instructions and pick out whatever color palette pleases you. Be sure to support your local quilt shops. A lot of quilt shops, at least in our area, are having to close down or have reduced hours because of the coronavirus. But they are also offering a lot of online sales. And so even if you're buying things online, try to buy from an actual small business quilt shop rather than from some of the larger manufacturers, just because the small businesses are going to be getting hit the hardest during this crisis, for sure. So that's just my little shout out to support small businesses. And please leave any comments or questions you have below. Please make sure you're following hashtag Brooklyn Connected QAL on Instagram and Facebook and any social media so that you can see what everyone else is working on and share photos and share comments and advice for everyone who's working on this quilt-along. And thanks so much for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. All right, bye-bye.